So far, we've been working with one single view, and that's fine for these really basic applications that we're building, but eventually we're going to want to have multiple different interfaces, right, that we can move between. It's actually quite simple to do this. There's a way to do this with just code, and there's a way to do this in the user interface. I'm going to show you how to do it with the user interface, and then we're going to get into a couple different types of navigation that can happen within Xcode. Now, the reason I'm showing you this technique first is because it's simpler than the code version. The code version we will be using later to trigger events based on certain parameters. So I have a new project, very simple, just basic project. I'm in my main.storyboard right here, and I have the basic view controller with the entry point here. So let's go ahead and build a second view controller. And the easiest way to do this is just to go up to our buttons, and I'll type in view controller, and look at that. We have a pop-up just called view controller, and there's a bunch of other ones that we're going to get into later. I'm just going to drag in the one called view controller, and as I drag it, it builds a second view. I can drop that in, and now I have these two views. Let's change the background color on these just so it's a little bit easier to work with. I'm going to go to the attribute editor and change that background color. And I'll do that on this one as well, so we know which screen we're on immediately. All right, so our entry point is this first view controller, and what we're going to do is build a button that takes us to this second view controller. And again, this is really simple. I'm just going to go up here to my object library and type in button. I'll drag and drop that button in. Let's give it some text. We'll say next. And all we need to do, just like as if we were connecting things to our code where we hold down right click and drag or control click and drag, we just do that but with the other view controller. So I'm going to control click and drag it to this other view controller and release. And a bunch of different things appear. Show detail, present modally, present as popover, and custom. What we're going to do is just show. We'll get into what these mean a little bit later. And what this has done is now it's created this little line that connects these two. So just like how we have that storyboard entry arrow showing us what our first storyboard is, or what our first view is rather, this is called a segue, and this segue is showing you the transition from this screen to this screen. We can also see it up here. We have the show segue, because we picked show. If we had done present modally, it would say present segue. But we have the show segue to view controller. So the second one is also titled view controller. They have the same name. We probably should change that. I'll just click up here and give it a title. I'll call it second. Let's click up here, and in the attribute editor, I'll call this first. All right, so now we have first and second, and this is going to create a segue to this second view controller. All right, if we click on the segue itself, there's tons of different options in here that we can work with, and we'll be using these later whenever we define a custom segue class. But let's just hit play and give this a try. All right, so we have this next button. I click it, and it goes to my next screen. Let's create a back button now. So I'm going to go back out to my buttons, drag and drop a back button in here, and do the same thing where I just control click and drag back to my old one. I'll say show. So now we have another segue. It didn't add it in the most easy to view way, but there's the second segue. So let's hit play again. And so here's our first screen. I'm going to click next, and it'll present to my second screen. And if I hit back, it'll go back to my first screen. Now notice whenever I click these, they both pull up from the bottom. So some of those options we have can change how that works. We'll get into that in a future video, but that's the very basic way to create multiple views and have segues connect them together.